Wells of Silence by TheBeckster. Chapter 4, 15 Weeks. Anakin was unsurprised when Palpatine invited her to afternoon tea a couple days later. The Chancellor always tried to make time to see her when she was on Coruscant for more than a couple days. She imagined it was something like having a doting uncle. The visits were usually quite pleasant, though she had a feeling this one would be rather uncomfortable. She arrived promptly at 3. The small table in the office was already set for 2, and Palpatine was waiting for her in one of the comfortable chairs. "Anakin, my dear, how are you?" he asked, rising to greet her. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. "How are you?" "Oh, I'm doing well enough. Please sit. What can I get for you? Tea? Caf? Something a little stronger, perhaps? I managed to procure some more of that Alderanian wine you like." "Just tea, thank you." Anakin seated herself on the stylish but not very comfortable couch across from Palpatine's chair. Palpatine motioned, and a service droid quickly stepped forward with a cup of tea. Anakin took it with soft thanks. She waited quietly while Palpatine received his own cup. He didn't thank his service droid for his tea. He never thanked the droids. Most people didn't. After taking a long sip, he spoke. "I noticed that the 501st shipped out the other day, and yet you're still here on Coruscant. Does the Council have big plans for you while you're here?" Anakin nearly laughed into her tea. She had spoken with the Chancellor before about her desire to be a council member in the future. No doubt this was what he was intimating towards. He couldn't have been farther from the truth. "No, I'm afraid not. I've been taken off active duty for the time being." "Whatever for?" Anakin could feel his glaring curiosity. Even underneath his concern, she tried to put him off the line of questioning by being vague. She knew it wouldn't work. "Health concerns?" "Health concerns? My dear, you're young and as healthy as they come. Whatever could be serious enough to take you off active duty?" Anakin paused for a second as she prepared to lie to Palpatine. She didn't like lying to him. It was almost as bad as lying to Obi-Wan, but even he couldn't know the whole truth. Nobody could know. Palpatine took her hesitance for offense. He hastily covered himself. "I'm sorry. You don't have to tell me. It's none of my business." No, it's all right," Anakin quickly assured him. "You'd find out eventually." She muttered, staring into her tea cup. She lifted her gaze and took a deep breath, trying to bring the words forward again. She'd only said them twice, ever. It was like trying to speak a foreign language, harder than that, actually. "I'm pregnant." Palpatine actually choked on his coffee. "What?" he asked through coughs. Anakin could sense 1,000 questions bloom in the Chancellor's mind. His curiosity was grating against her. She waited for him to stop coughing. "I wasn't aware such things were allowed for a Jedi." "They're not." Anakin found she couldn't keep looking at Palpatine. Her eyes locked onto her tea. "You haven't been expelled from the Order, have you?" "No." Then, suddenly Palpatine's curiosity died away, replaced with shock and sorrow and a touch of anger. Oh, my dear, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." Anakin felt a little better, letting Palpatine draw his own conclusions. At least she wasn't outright lying to him, too. "Are you all right?" Anakin shrugged. "Considering the circumstances, I suppose things could be much worse. I've gotten over it." "How did the Jedi react to this?" "They were shocked and upset. Worried. Something like, this hasn't happened since long before Master Yoda became a Jedi." It's a little awkward for everyone. And how do you feel about this? Anakin paused. Nobody had asked her that yet. I I don't know for the most part. I've gotten over it. There's no going back or changing what happened, so I guess I'm kind of excited, but also not. And that was true. Anakin was excited beyond words for what had happened. She was having a baby, Padme's baby. This was one of the greatest things to happen to her overall. She was ecstatic. Granted, the timing was awful with being in the middle of a war, but at the same time, it made her cover story more plausible. And yet, it was terrifying. What if the council found out the truth? She'd be banished. The Jedi were her life, and without them, she wouldn't know what to do. They may even try and take her child away from her. The Jedi could never know the truth, not even Obi-Wan. Because if one knew, they'd all know. And that would be the end of everything. So the truth would have to stay a secret. One only Anakin and Padme knew. Only spoken about behind closed doors, like it was something dirty or dangerous. Anakin hated it, but she had to accept it. There was no other option. Palpitine smiled kindly at Anakin. It's good to see that you are being so optimistic about this. You always didn't know how to make the best out of a bad situation. I dare say the next several months will be a rather trying time for you. When are you due, my dear? Anakin half smiled back and shrugged. I'm only about 3 months along. Well, I don't know how much help I can offer, but if you ever need anything, Anakin, please don't hesitate to ask. Palpatine raised his cup to Anakin. Here's to your good health, my dear. Palpatine ruminated darkly as he strode through his home. It was the middle of the night. The darkness and silence pressed in heavily. He stopped, keyed a code into a security panel, and a door slid open smoothly. His meditation chamber was a barren room, undecorated, unfurnished, so different from the rest of his dwelling, certainly unbefitting of the Supreme Chancellor, but it resonated clearly with the Force. The power of the dark side seemed to funnel into the room. It filled Palpatine with an invigorating potential. He felt like he could conquer the galaxy. Palpatine strode to the center of the room and sat down. He needed to meditate on what he had learned today. Anakin Skywalker was pregnant. Anakin Skywalker was not supposed to have children. That had not been included in his plans. Never once in any of his many contingencies and alternate plans had the possibility of Anakin Skywalker ever becoming pregnant cross his mind. Stupid girl. Yes, of course he knew she was married. He had known that for almost as long as she had been married. Her escorting Amidala back to Naboo after Geonosis alone had been suspect enough to look into. He had tucked away that information for future use. Even 3 years ago, he had known it would prove to be a useful and sharp instrument in Anakin's fall. He never would have thought Anakin so careless, so stupid as to actually run the risk of getting pregnant. Even Jedi knew about birth control, and one as skilled as Anakin would have no trouble acquiring several reliable means of contraception. Was she asking to be discovered, to be banished? Sometimes he forgot how arrogant and foolish his young apprentice was. He should have watched her more carefully, kept her out of the outer rim more often. This was all a matter of bad timing. Even one extra day away from Coruscant could have prevented this completely. Of course, now that this was happening, it was time to revise his plans. The possibilities lay out before Palpatine like the freshly placed pieces of a Deharic game. the best plan hiding amidst the jumble. He reached out, testing the possibilities. If Anakin were allowed to have her child and her husband, the Republic would win the war and grow stronger from it. Anakin would leave the Jedi on her own accord, owning up to her choices. She would make a home with Amidala. The Jedi would prosper and flourish. He would be disposed. He'd die in obscurity of old age. That wouldn't do. Fortunately, reality was stacked against this future. He knew Anakin would do anything to hide the truth from the Jedi that would sow distrust and unrest between her and the Council. Anakin would choose her husband and child over the Order. She would leave. That would happen even without his interference. But her parting would be more beneficial if it was rockier. That string could lead to her fall. Palpatine set aside that piece to think on further. As for Anakin's child, there were several options. They could live, be born and raised, grow up beloved and cared for by their mother. They could be taught the ways of the Force, taught the strength and power of the dark side. They wouldn't be Jedi. Anakin would never give up her child to the Jedi, but without a doubt, they would be strong in the Force, an equal match, if not stronger than Anakin herself. When Anakin fell, her child would become a valuable pawn as well. Suddenly, a rush of visions flashed before his mind's eye, and Palpatine felt a series of strong emotions: anger, failure, fear, and betrayal. Palpatine saw a dark figure loom over him. He saw his fall to his death. In an instant, he knew that Anakin's child would be directly responsible for his death. Well, that certainly wouldn't do. It became all too clear that Anakin Skywalker's child had to die. With that realization, the viable options for the future narrowed down significantly. Palpatine sampled the possibilities. The child could suffer a childhood accident or illness, but that would delay his plans too much. Death in infancy would push Anakin over the edge, but orchestrating that would be difficult. Not impossible, though. It would work best if Anakin lost the child before it lived. That would really be the push he needed. The power of the dark side could do the job, but Anakin was far too sensitive. She would feel it immediately. Palpatine would expose himself before he was ready for her to know. Poison was an obvious choice, a less potent one that wouldn't kill a strong body like Anakin, but would make strong work of an unborn child. Then again, poison was a bit too obvious. Anything he gave her would be detected with blood tests. Poison was easy to backtrace. The same would go for mercenaries, assassins, and bounty hunters. Effective, but quite obvious. And setting up the proper channels and proxies would take time. Of course, it was entirely possible for Palpatine to just allow someone else to the job without his influence. Skywalker had no shortage of enemies, and she had mentioned that her little problem was going to be a secret for Jedi years only. If she could get off planet and encounter some trouble, undoubtedly she would end up injured. Skywalker seemed to draw trouble to herself, and she was always getting hurt for one reason or another. And in these delicate early stages, it wouldn't be surprising if physical trauma caused some damage to the baby. Palpatine followed that train of thought, planning, replanning, creating a new timetable, and more contingencies. Anakin's foolishness would not foil his conquest. After all, he hadn't gotten as far as he had without being flexible. End of chapter.